I'm so honored that you're willing to do this with me. I've read it twice.
I'm so flattered that you read it twice. That's
Oh, wait.
really cool. I don't even know if I've read it twice.
That's actually what I was going to ask you. I was like, wait,
I
do novelists actually read it from beginning to end? And like, how many times do they?
I think with the majority of my books, I don't think I've ever actually read the book when it's in book form.
Wait, really? That's fascinating.
Yeah,
Let me just give a quick intro to you, just for people who are watching. Adam Rapp is a prolific writer, and correct me if these numbers are wrong, but I believe at this point in your life, you've written 27 plays, 13 novels, you've been a screenwriter on 10 projects, you've directed 3 films, you've won an Obie, you've been nominated for 2 Tony Awards and a Pulitzer Prize in drama. And you've obviously won like so many awards. But is that about accurate?
yeah. I think the 27 plays
Is it like double that, actually?
doesn't include the plays that no one's ever seen or a few other plays. I think it's higher than that, but
Okay.
that's more embarrassing than good, I think.
Oh no, it's insane. It's incredible to me. So we're going to be chatting about Wolf at the Table, which is your most recent novel, which came out actually last March 2024,
That's
right?
it. That's the book.
Okay.
Wow, there it is.
Here it is.
Wolf at the Table is a multi-generational story that follows the Larkins, a seemingly normal, working-class Catholic family. A triple homicide in their town is a defining moment in all of their lives and casts a dark shadow over the family for generations. As the siblings spread across the country in pursuit of their version of the American dream, they are haunted by their constant proximity to violence. Even Alec, one of their own, suffers from childhood trauma and possible mental illness that paves the way for egregious acts of his own.
It takes place over the course of, is it 59 or 60 years, with each chapter taking place within a single day and told from the perspective of a family member.
That's great. Yeah, that's great.
What else can I add there? It's like, uh,
I think the novel defies sort of categorization because I
yes.
want to believe it's a what they call upmarket or a literary book, and I think it is, but I think some people might have been misled thinking that it's a thriller because there's a bit of a serial killer spree narrative as well.
Yeah.
Um, and then I also think it's been compared to some books that maybe it shouldn't have been, but like what do we do about Kevin or whatever that's called? I can't
Yeah, yeah,
remember.
yeah. We need to talk about
We need
Kevin.
to talk about Kevin, yeah, which
Berlin
I
Ramsey
did,
project. Right.
yeah, and I didn't read that, but I saw the movie, and all of those I'm flattered by any comparison to any great work or good work. But I think it's hard to categorize the book because I just thought of I needed to tell the story. Um, and it's also an epic and it's a bit of a saga and it's a bit of it's definitely about this family. And so I definitely knew I wanted to write this big epic, but I didn't know in the bookstore if it made it to the bookstore what shelf it would be on. I really didn't.
Yeah, that's interesting. The inspiration behind this story is so fascinating. And I feel like you are somebody as a writer who prides themselves in actually not using parts of their life in their work. And this actually goes against that. And there's a bit of you in it, a lot of your mom in it. So can you tell that story?
Yeah, I was researching like a true crime project that I was thinking about writing that centered on John Wayne Gacy. I kind of grew up around where all those murders happened. I grew up in Joliet, Illinois, which is about 45 minutes south of where he lived and where he was, committing all these murders. So I always had a bit of a fascination with him. I mean, I remember growing up in Joliet, and anytime there was like a van that was going through the neighborhood or through the apartment complex where I grew up, um, there was this feeling of like, oh, don't get in a van. There was just kind of a dreadful feeling in my childhood because of the Gacy stuff and because of the Halloween movies and because of, the kind of Joliet, I think, was considered a bit of a murder capital in Illinois as well. There was a lot of crime there. There was a lot of gang warfare there. We lived in a kind of rough neighborhood. So I carried that with me through my adolescence and sometimes probably my imagination. Um, but I couldn't shake it. So when I started to write this project, I was starting to take notes. I was doing a lot of research on Gacy, and I was watching interviews and little mini documentaries interviewing cops who had interviewed him, and there were, things about him in prison, and then there was a lot of stuff in book form about his past, and weirdly during that same time, I got a box in the mail from my aunt Roberta, who was my mom's power of attorney. My mom passed away in 1997, and years later, I got this box in the mail, and it was some possessions that my mom wanted me to have. Roberta was still like sending those things out to members of my family who my mom, assigned these things to. And this was probably 10 years. I think this is about 10 years ago, actually. So this would be 2015. In fact, I had just finished the other novel I had done with Little Brown had just come out. And I was thinking about this TV project, right? This Gacy thing or something about serial killers. And I opened the box, and there's like some keepsakes, and there's uh, a couple of baseball cards that my mom kept for me because I was a big baseball card collector. There was like a crucifix. We were Catholic. And then there was her work ID. And it was, I wish I had it with me, but I don't. It's in my place upstate. But it was just a work badge. And she died of cancer in 97, but she worked for at the Illinois prison system. And at the time, I looked at her work badge. It said June 1995 was the date on the badge, or maybe it was May 1995. And she was in pretty bad decline with cancer pretty quickly after that. She worked for a while at Stateville Correctional, which is in Joliet, Illinois. But she had sort of worked less and less and less. And I looked at the Gacy notes that I was taking, and he was executed in May of 94 at Stateville Correctional. And I was like, what? I was thrown. And my mom never talked about work. She never talked about what happened at work with us, with her kids. I have a sister, an older sister, and a younger brother. And the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I was like, is it possible that she could have been there when he was there? And then I made a call, and they told me that in fact she was. And, they didn't have any confirmation or any record. I think a lot of the record keeping back then was sort of analog. But it's very likely that she would have been the nurse on duty when he was brought in. He was brought in that morning, very early in the morning, from another prison in southern Illinois. They helicoptered him in to Stateville Correctional, where he was executed later that day. And it's very likely I found out that my mom might have given him his final physical, just his vitals. They have to check your vitals before they set up the the what do they call it? The injection system that
Yeah.
terminates a life. So that just, again, there's no confirmation about that, but my imagination just kind of went crazy. And I was like, how does that happen? My mom was the oldest of 13 in a very staunch Catholic family. She grew up in Elmira, New York, but then later in Manteno, Illinois, which is near the Indiana border, somewhat near Joliet, but kind of in the vicinity, in the Chicagoland vicinity. She went to University of Chicago for nurses school, and while she was there, the year after she got out, Richard Speck committed the crimes against the nurses from the University of Chicago nursing school, and I found out that she lived across the street. So there was another event that happened that that's a little too elaborate to describe, but I just got caught up with this idea that how this pretty simple, on paper, my mom was a simple woman. She, again, was the oldest of 13. She was married briefly, had 3 kids, raised those 3 kids on her own on a nurse's salary, which is not a lot. And, then she battled cancer in the last decade and a half of her life. She died when she was 55. She had a rough life, and she made as much as she could with it. But I couldn't get over the fact that, like, someone who I knew to be very, normal, and she didn't drink, she didn't date men. Once she and my dad got divorced, she was very pretty conservative about how she spent her time in terms of intimacy and dating. She just pretty much devoted her rest of her life to her nursing career and my brother's career, who became a pretty well-known actor. And, I was like, how does this happen where this kind of a woman um, is so close to this kind of violence and these kind of men? When it's Richard Specker, it's Gacy, and this other thing she was a witness about, which was this highway killing spree. Um, she wound up being the only witness that could put these men behind bars, and she put them behind bars in the prison that she worked. So it's all just so crazy, right? And
Yeah.
I just couldn't shake that. And then I just started thinking about a character, and so to me, America and violence, and in particular, serial killer violence, and that's a big part of our culture now. And it's been, it's kind of where the notion of a serial killer kind of became famous. I know there's Ed Gein from the 50s, who was the model for um, the movie Psycho and the novel prior to that. Um, I know obviously there's Jack the Ripper, which precedes all of that, but in America especially, there's such a fascination and a kind of an appetite in terms of our imaginations for like what is this? And I think I got really intrigued by how the innocence of America and this sort of this presumed kind of innocence of America, this sort of uh, Puritan vibe that a lot of our religious sectors of our country believe us to be. How does that sit right next to this other, you know, horrific, we have school shootings in the news every week, it seems. And then we have serial killers. Like, how do those things speak to each other, and how does it come to be? So I just got really intrigued by that idea. So that's when I started writing it.
Wow. So, and it was also to honor your mom, right? Like, and her life and all of that. But then once you're looking at all of this violence, like, what question are you trying to answer? Is it about how are we in such close proximity to that? Is it like how serial killers are made or born? What was the driving question that you asked yourself as
Yeah,
you?
it wasn't so much me trying to figure out the answer. It was just being led by the question, and just trying to create more curiosity and delve deeper into the behavior, into the kind of compulsions of these characters. And um, because I don't think the book has really any answers. I do believe that there's good and evil. I don't know that I believe in a kind of hierarchical religious thing, or a mythological thing where there's God and the devil, but I do think there is good and evil, and there's in man and woman's hearts, there are propensities for both in huge, huge ways. I don't know that the book really looks for an answer to that, but I think it really tries to dramatize and make a compelling case that both exist. And it's like we don't have a choice, in some ways. I think Cormac McCarthy does that really beautifully in his work too, and and he's an inspiration, I think, to a lot of writers. But I remember I went through about a 5-year process where I just read all of his stuff, and I think there's something blatantly brutal. I would say he's a brutalist in some ways, but I think there's a brutal truth to the notion that, you know, you're going to it's going to be as brutal as it is beautiful in this world. And, I think both things kind of exist. And if we're lucky and we can steer clear of calamity and we can conduct our lives with some kind of moral compass, then maybe we've lived a really good life. But sometimes um, you can't choose your family. You can't choose. You're lucky if you raise a good dog. You're lucky if your parents are good parents. You're lucky if your sister is a good sister. And in many cases, that's just not true. So I was really compelled by that. And my mom, being the oldest of 13, I'm the middle child of three, and I was probably the black sheep in my family. But in a family of 13, there's all kinds of different issues in her family, and there's some stuff with the law, but there was a lot of medical issues in her family. And, you know, some of her brothers and sisters are really healthy and will live long lives, and some have died and had serious, medical issues. Um, and I just think it's like a fact of our lives that, you can't choose your family, and you can't choose how that turns out, So that was something I was really intrigued by.
Yeah, because it's like no matter how good of a sister Myra was to even Alec, he was still steering in this direction. So there was no like saving him or fixing it. It was like, that was her brother and he was going to have that path, it seems like.
Yeah, and I don't want to spoil anything for anyone who might see this, but I think this is controversial for me to say, but I have a lot of sympathy for Alec in some ways. He had a bit of a tough roll of the dice as a kid. It doesn't excuse his behavior or the atrocious things that he wound up doing. I think for me, his path to that horrible behavior, um, I think it was compulsive, and I don't think he figured out how to manage those compulsions. And I think things that happened to him, that were not fair. That doesn't mean one has to become a killer, and I'm not excusing that, but I do think that with a different set of circumstances as a child, those things might not have gotten triggered in him, and I don't know, I think any reader who comes to the book will have their own feeling about that, and I'm sure there are probably people on the side who have sympathy for Alec, and there are probably those who never want to read another sentence about him. I battled both during the writing of it.
Like Donald, Denny, Alec, Ronan, his son, all suffer from some type of mental illness. It's a big part of this. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I also that was a big thought connector for me. I mean, in our culture, there's so much uh, pharmacology, and there's so much psychological diagnosis, and it's in my family. My father was diagnosed with schizophrenia for a bit, then struggled with that, was kind of on and off that track for a long time. So it was kind of in my life. I struggled with some severe depression in my 30s that was really bad. I think a lot of us have something or other, but there's something about the legacy of like extreme violent mental illness. Is it inherited? Is it learned? Is it deep in our DNA? Does it skip a generation? Does it go mother to son, father to son, mother to daughter? That all of that is fascinating to me, and it seems to be kind of random. I mean, I don't think they can point to any kind of genetic map when these things emerge. So I was trying to just uh, not play with it, but just try to. I was curious about it, and I think it felt right to like deal with it with this family. Like it's interesting because you know Ronan and his son clearly have inherited something from Denny, and that's talked about in a very medical way in the book. But Alec, for instance, he may be struggling with something and he never knows because that generation, there was not it wasn't a cultural thing to have diagnosis like that. It was a different world. I mean, I think schizophrenia and psychosis, there have been so many shifts and modes of that since the 50s. And now there's so much more known. There's so much more, um, what the medical cocktail can be, how someone can be helped. And I think there are probably a lot of people who have gone undiagnosed. So I think Alec probably struggles with something, certainly depression, I think, but it's never diagnosed. He's not even in a system. He's never really held a real job. So I was interested in that, uh, pulling characters in different directions, and demon. I love characters who are struggling with their own demons in some ways. I think in Ronan's way, and in Denny's case, and Ronan, who is his son, and then Ronan's son also, like they will probably, if they outlive my imagination into different realms, they'll be struggling all of their days with it.
I felt a little hopeful by the end of it in terms of like the mental health part of this, just like we were talking about generationally. And it's like Donald, obviously, and Alec were not in positions where they got help. Almost Denny got it, but it was not in a way that he was able to live a very full life.
Right.
Ronan got closer to that, got on this cocktail of medication that, though he continued to have these episodes, it was more manageable.
Yeah.
And then I look at his son, and obviously he will have that all that more because he'll also have the father with whom he can hopefully have that conversation about it with. So I felt like there was some hope at the end with that. Is that something that was obviously
Yeah,
intentional?
the last chapter wasn't Ben George, who was my terrific editor at Little Brown. To be completely frank, I ended the novel with the chapter that happened before, where Denny's story comes to an end. It ended bluntly like that.
Wow.
And my editor and I spoke a lot about what we wanted the reader to take away from the book, and I realized I didn't want the reader to feel like they were left in the basement, with the lights off. Um, I didn't want it to be a punishing read. And so we started talking about it, and I thought about this sort of future for Ronan's life, and like he and his wife getting back together and having their son Bruce, and making sure that that life felt solid and there was some hope there. But with that, there's also, Bruce is rounding the bases in his little league game, and he sees something in the sky, and it's his first glimmers of his own, what it's going to be, his own battle with some version of psychosis. So it's leavened with that, because I think the truth is, in that family, it's always going to be something that someone's contending with. But I do feel like that family loves each other, that Ronan has found a place of peace with his wife, and he and Henny, I think, are going to be not without problems, but I think they'll be married, and I think they'll raise their son really well. So I think that is hopeful. I think, I mean, how many broken families do we know? How many? It's such a prevalent part of my childhood. I think every kid I knew was going through a divorce with going through their parents' divorce. My parents split up when I was 4.5. I think it was just a rash of it, and when I grew up. So I think it is a hopeful thing when a family can make a go of it. And I think that I'm glad people feel that way when they read the book, because I've heard that from certain readers. And I think if I would have made the other choice, um, I don't know how well the book would have done, and I don't know if anyone would be reading it. I think I'm happy that the book has found an audience, and that people seem to be talking about it and recommending it and passing it on, and it's having a nice little life. So I'm happy about that.
Oh, for sure. Another theme or issue that you bring up, or I think that's so layered in there, is this idea of emotional repression and avoidance. You have like Alec repressing his emotions. I don't even think he's aware of what his emotions are. You have Ava completely avoiding what she knows to be true or suspects to be true about her son. So I guess my question is, do you think that Alec would have been different, or his life could have been different if he wasn't repressing those emotions, or Ava had maybe called out the situation sooner?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, God, anyone who stomachs what he went through as a kid with the priests, and just sort of a general feeling of outsiderness in his own family, you know, you, if you're not able to express that, and if you're not able to like give voice to that anger, whether it's a school counselor or a therapist or even just a friend, then it's going to build up in you, and it's just going to keep building up in you. I mean, I know when I struggled with my own um, mental health issues in my 30s, it was for that very reason. Like I hadn't been able to actually express some of the things that had happened to me. I'd never really articulated them. I'd never really contended with them. I never said out loud certain things. And I think I'm so glad that I did, because once I did, I found a way to heal. And I feel like with Alec, I think the reason why he winds up in a place of annihilation at the end of the book is because he's become so embittered, and he's in this circuitry of what he's doing to these boys, and how his every he's just his life is just continuing to complete that circuitry, and there's no way out at that point. And I think his only way out becomes how the book ends for him. But I think if he would have gotten help or found a way to, talk to somebody, or it could have been Duke in some ways, but Duke was just not the right guy for him. Um, if there was just one person, all it takes sometimes is one person. And I just think he'd never found that person. For me, it was like sometimes it was a coach. I was a really serious basketball player, and I ran track and really seriously, and I was an athlete, and that was like that saved my life, honestly. And sometimes it's a coach, and sometimes it's a teacher, and um, sometimes it is a priest, and sometimes it's not a dirty priest. Sometimes it's a good priest. Um, but without that, I think some kids, um, they wind up kind of harboring a lot of pain and anger and resentment, and then it comes out kind of later as apocalypse. And I feel like that's kind of what happens with Alec.
It was also interesting just to see this mother, and you understand why she doesn't want to acknowledge this potentially really dark truth about her son. But as the reader reading that, you're like, you want to scream and be like, do something, because that might have changed the course of your child's life.
Yeah, I think Ava's belief is that, well, if he goes through the altar boy system, and the church will help him in some way.
Yeah.
And he wasn't an athlete. He didn't have like special interests at school. And the church actually became a nightmare for him. And I think that's the interesting thing. Like, I remember my grandpa on my mom's side. I hardly ever heard him speak, and I hardly ever saw him speak to his children.
Wow.
Um, yeah, and he had 13 kids. He was a tool and die guy, like the father in the book.
Yeah.
And he just worked. I mean, he had 13 kids. He worked all the time, and he was pretty much exhausted. I would see him at Thanksgivings and Christmases, and he would always be like, had the electric uh, meat saw at the end of the table, and he would be like carving up the
Yeah.
turkey. But I don't remember him speak. I mean, he wasn't mute. I think he was just so quiet. And my grandma, her name was Dolores, my mom's mom. She was more like Ava in terms of like presiding over the family, and she was sort of she was like the general, of this house. And what's interesting is, because there were 13 kids, there were never 13 kids all at once, because she was either pregnant or nursing for something like 22 years, like if you did the math. So there were like waves of kids that would leave the house, and they didn't live in a very big house. And so whenever there would be a grand gathering of all the kids, in the, all of my mom's had 8 sisters and 3 brothers, there would be all these people at this giant table, which was in a very small dining room. Um, and there were all the cousins, and it was just like a circus. It felt like we were part of a circus, and how does one manage this? And
Yeah.
in the novel, I wanted to write a larger family, but I knew I couldn't service 13 kids. So it's, but like in half of that, or less than half of that, um, it's 6, and one of the children, early on dies, but so it's 5, but it's a much smaller family. But even that is a large family. And I wonder about, like, if you have a child during that time, and the husband's working all the time, like, how does a woman manage even 5 kids? It was 6 and then 5. Like, you have to rely on the church. You have to rely on after school programs or something. And I think Alec just didn't have the right guidance, and the church kind of failed him in a pretty horrible way too. So
Completely. It is crazy to think in such a short time how differently we're heading as a society, where I don't know anyone who has that large of a family, like you know what I mean, at this point in our life.
yeah, I lived in Aurora, Illinois for a year, and I went to a Catholic school, a little parochial school called Our Lady of Good Counsel. And there was a kid on my basketball team named Kevin Groom, and he had 19 brothers and sisters.
Oh my God.
And they lived in a giant mansion. And I would go, it wasn't a nice, it was just, I don't know, it was this giant mansion, and it was not in Aurora's not a fancy suburb of Chicago, but they had to find a way to have 19 kids. And I remember they had like giant, huge thing, like vats of peanut butter. Like everything they got was in bulk. Everything was, and
Yeah.
I don't ever remember seeing all the kids at once, but I just remember like there was kind of a train station feel to whenever I was at Kevin's house. This all these kids would just be coming in and out, and I never met all of them. I don't think it was just this sort of chaos. And I was like, how do you do that, family? But yeah, that was the other only other time I've been near a family like that, and I don't know how they do it.
I don't either. Wow. Um, okay, I'm curious. Can we talk a little bit about your process? The structure I thought was really interesting. Like it's four parts. It's like six chapters, three, six, three, epilogue. It it's like a dance of some kind. Like the two first parts start with Myra, the last two parts start with Ronan's story. Was that intentional to kind of like shift the point of view there?
Yeah, I wanted all the numbers that you just cited. I didn't. It just felt like naturally fell into place, and my editor and I had to move a few things around a little bit, a few things. But it all. I've never been the kind of writer who's like, um, who does a for my novels. I don't like note card them and then write an outline. I literally just it's like for me it's like how I imagine what I've heard just jazz musicians describing what their process is when they're composing. I just have a feeling and an idea, and I have like really strong signposts. I knew the rules I created for myself were I knew every chapter was going to happen in one day. I didn't want to ever tell anybody that. And I think it's still somewhat of a secret. I don't think maybe people know it's a secret in the book. My editor knows, and other people who know the book well know. But like that was an intentional constraint I put on myself, was that every chapter had to be one day, and it had to be from some character's perspective, a different perspective.
Did you do that to push that to the brink of whatever it was going to be?
I like, and as a playwright, you hear this thing early in your career when you're taking classes or you're learning from other playwrights called
It
like
can't be
what's
any other day kind of thing.
yeah, yeah, it's a Passover question. Like
Yeah.
what makes this day different than any other day?
Okay.
I like the compression of that. I've written a number of plays where like everything happens in real time in one night. I like the compression of that. So I thought if I gave myself that task, could I adhere to it and pull it off? And at first I was like, I don't think I can. And then I realized, oh, I can flash back in moments if I want to. I can play with time if I'm staying in the present tense, and I can play with time in fun ways. And then I wound up really enjoying it. And I thought, well, like there's one chapter that's a Christmas dinner. It's a Christmas Eve dinner. And I thought, well, this feels like writing a play, right? You're writing real time, people are on the table. And I enjoy playwriting. I really enjoy the constraints of playwriting. And I thought if I push that onto this novel and I force myself to do it, I might get some good drama out of those days. And I think the stakes got higher for the characters when I put that rule on myself. Um, so yeah, that was something that I knew I was going to do. I didn't know the time jumps, and I didn't know the time breaks. I just let that happen naturally. I would just sort of meditate. Sometimes I'd be like, God, who do I need to hear from?
Well, speaking of that, we never hear from Donald, and I was curious why he didn't have a chapter
He
in your
did. He
mind.
did. He
Oh,
did
he
have a
did.
chapter that I liked very much that my editor really, really, we wrestled about that one.
Wait,
Um,
oh my God, I would kill to read it. I wanted to hear from Donald. I
yeah.
want to hear.
Yeah, if I had my way, the novel would be 100 pages longer. I think it's a better novel that it's not. But if I had my way, because of how I feel about those characters, Donald has a chapter, and then one of the sisters, um, Lexi has a chapter. Um, already in the book, but the other sister um, had a really cool chapter, just her and Lexi. God, why am I blanking on my?
Fiona?
What's that?
You're saying Lexi and Fiona each
Yeah,
currently have
yeah.
one.
Fiona had her own chapter later in the book
Okay.
that I really
Now
like.
this is just
It's referenced that chapter and what happened in that chapter is referenced anyway in the novel, and I've managed to feather it in. But it was a really cool chapter. They're having lunch in Connecticut, and Fiona asks her for money, and she pretends that she has a broken arm. Um,
yes, you referenced that.
it's referenced, but I actually built that out as a chapter, and it really came down to like Ben really loved that chapter, and he loved the chapter with Donald too. But he was like, we gotta. He felt that, and I agree with him. He felt that keeping the novel braiding between Myra and Alex stories became important about halfway through to like really adhere to that because he felt that's where the real reader momentum was going. And he's a brilliant editor. Um, and I think he made the right decision. But if I were to like, build more story for, if it becomes this series or limited series or something like that, I would grab those pieces because I think they're pretty vital.
Can you give me a little insight into what the Donald chapter was?
The Donald chapter was he's sneaking away to another town nearby, and he's um, going to I don't even know if you can say a whorehouse anymore, but he's going to a, a sex worker's house, not to have sex with her, but so she'll administer his insulin for him. And they have a conversation and a relationship, and he brings her like pastries, and she's this girl, and then that character shows up at Christmas Eve asking for money from him, and it was this disruption of the night, and it was great. It was really cool, and I really liked it. But I think Ben felt like it sidetracked us too much in a Donald story, and while he's there, and she administers his insulin, this other event happens that is Duke, who kind of makes another appearance, and I think it would have been cool, but it might have been too off track, in terms of, as I said, the reader momentum. But I really love and miss that chapter, and the later chapter with Fiona and Lexi, I also really like.
Mhm.
Um, but you got to kill your darlings, as they say.
Yeah,
And
very well. I
and
guess
then I felt strongly about it.
it's like in the first two parts, like that's when Lexi, I think, and Fiona have their section, but then section 3 and 4, those two parts, it really is just Myra, Ronan, and Alec, right?
That's
Like,
right.
so it does kind of shift to just, speed up, I guess, in that direction. God, that's so interesting. I was wondering about that.
Yeah, and then yeah, I really think I was trying to write kind of like a Steinbeck book or something. Like I was trying to write this grand opus, and and what
What
you
it
realize
is.
is that people, readers really want to read the interesting parts, and if the novel is fully interesting, then they'll read the full novel. And I feel like my editor was very in tune with that. So I have to trust him.
Yeah, for sure. Like you really take your time with the words that you use. Like I was just recently reading the Stephen King book on like his writing memoir or whatever, and he's all about simplicity, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Zero adverbs. Like Hemingway is very much the same way. Like, and I appreciate that as a writer too. But this is like the complete opposite. It forces you as the reader to like really sit in these moments and like wade through it. And sometimes like I would just read these sentences like 3 or 4 times because I'm like, how does this mind think of these words? So how intentional is that? Is that just how your mind works? And is it like do these metaphors and similes come to you so quickly, or are these things that you're really like sitting with?
It comes it feels natural to express myself with that kind of language. I guess I'm guilty of being a maximalist. I mean, I really love writers who um, play with language. I love David Foster Wallace.
Oh, me too.
I mean, he's also a maximalist, but he's also a clown, and he's such a weird genius. Um, he's so funny. There's so much energy in his sentences. There's so much. He writes paragraphs of one sentence. It could be paragraphs, right? And I find that to be really freeing to try to write um, metaphorically, or I guess what the word would be, figuratively, I guess. I love Michael Ondaatje, who is the great Sri Lankan Canadian writer who, he has a novel called In the Skin of a Lion, which is, I think, one of the greatest things written. He's also a poet, and I think I get my brain like goes electric when I read that kind of work where the images are in the sentences and they're also embedded in thought, and how people express themselves. Not that people speak poetically and through dialogue, but I do think that there is a way to hold a reader's attention through metaphor and visuals, and that's what turns me on when I'm a reader. And so when I started to write, I wanted to write like that. I wanted to be the kind of writer who could hold somebody's attention with simile and metaphor. And I think I went through a period where I was way too verbose and mixing metaphors, and I was just trying so hard. And I think I had to go through that so I could get more better understanding of it. Ultimately, you do have to, I do love Hemingway. I do love Stephen King's spareness. I think there is a great clarity to that, and I appreciate it. And sometimes, when I'm reading a novel, I appreciate that kind of velocity. Hanya Yanagihara is a good friend of mine, is a terrific writer, obviously, one of our great writers. Um, she manages to do this really strange thing where her her work is like dense, like she doesn't write a lot of dialogue, so it's a lot of sentences, like narrative sentences, like stacked and stacks and stacks of narrative sentences. But there's such a velocity and such an ease with which they're delivered, and the way that our brain processes them. I think I read A Little Life in like 4 days, and it's a giant book. It's like 900 pages, and I'm not a fast reader. I like to slow down, and I like when I read Cormac McCarthy's stuff, I like taking my time with it. I
Yeah.
like looking up the words I don't know. I remember he was describing like a cliffside, and he used the word monkey rock, and I was like, what's monkey rock? And I go to the dictionary, look up monkey
Yeah.
rock. Like that is like so much fun for me.
Yeah.
And not that I want to be exactly that. Like DeLillo, who's one of my heroes, he writes very spare. His wit and his rage and his wit comes through the language, and it's like it's muscular, but it's spare. And I think I I realized I couldn't write like that, and I couldn't write like Steinbeck, and I think I had to just figure out um, you know, Catherine Harrison, not Catherine Harrison, I'm sorry, Catherine Dunn, who she wrote this incredible, why I'm blanking on her, one of my favorite novels right now, Geek Love, Geek Love, Geek Love.
Okay.
And, and, it's this gorgeous, insane, uh, these visuals of, freaks and this girl telling the story of her family, and it kind of deals with totalitarianism, and the language has a feeling of that, and it feels like she was writing that world for that language. And then you read her other two books, Truck and Attic, and they're really spare and not that world at all. So I admire that too. She can like shift into other modes. I don't know that I could write a really spare book. I think I'd be bored for myself. I like trying to find how to make the sentence pungent, and how to make you smell it and see it, and have um, things echoing that are visual and that are sensorial. That excites me when I'm writing, and that excites me when I read it. Um, so that's just how I do it.
Once, when he was a boy, the next door neighbor, Mrs. Kaminsky, accidentally backed her Plymouth over her poodle Skipper, whose skull popped like a plastic bag. Seemingly so simple, but that visual, like,
Hmm.
haunts me.
Yeah, I'm glad you feel that. Yeah.
Can I read you a couple of my other favorites just to see if
Yeah, sure.
okay.
I'll try
Um,
to. Yeah.
Thank you for ingesting the virus of dashed dreams and unrequited love. Now we're all inoculated.
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah.
An organ being freed from some crystalline web of anxiety.
Hmm.
Rang true for me for so many reasons. A giant teddy bear filled with pancake batter was used to describe a human. She can smell his unwashed hair, the odor coming off his scalp, like chicken fat left in the pan. And I was like, I just imagine you having so much fun writing those.
It is fun, and it sometimes it I also, to be honest, sometimes I'll be like, oh, it's not chicken fat, it's what is it? And I get caught up for like an hour. I'll just get caught up in like to find the most precise little gem, and it'll keep me from moving forward in my book. Like so it's fun, and it's painstaking, and it's also, and when it becomes that painstaking, then I'm like, just forget it, and I'll just move on. But I try to yeah, I do like it. I mean, I like, again, when I was reading those writers who I loved, those were the things that really made it memorable for me, was like the sensorial part of it, um, and how our world is so, our world is right here in front of us, and then there's this other world kind of right behind it that is like otherness. And I feel like the reading experience, because you're world building with the author as you read it and you're visualizing it. I'm like, well, I want to do some, I want to go be a weirdo with it. I want to try to show them the other world if I can.
Well, you're
Um,
like a painter in that way. Like you're painting that world very specifically through your words.
yeah, I think I used to draw when I was a kid, and I could like look at something and draw it exactly what it was. And I don't know that that's a skill, or it's just a ability, or I don't know what that is. But I got away from art. My mom always wanted me to be an artist, a visual artist, and I wanted to play basketball and baseball, so I ran hightailed away from it. But I think when I became um, an athlete, um, I was craving something artistic, and I think when I discovered writing, it was the visual part of that form that I think really lit my brain up, and I think that's why I still have that need to like try to find a way to draw the scene in some ways, and I think that goes back to when I was a kid. I don't think I can still draw a little bit, but I can't. I think I could draw like that lamp that I'm looking at that you can't see exactly as it was when I was like 7. I
Crazy.
can't do that now, but I could write about that lamp.
But now
Um,
you do it with the words and
yeah,
not.
I could write about that lamp in an interesting way right now. More, maybe it's a lamp, so it's not that interesting, but I could try to make it interesting.
I'm sure if anyone could make that lamp interesting, it's you. Wait, really fast, because I know I'm taking so much of your time, but a couple quick things. There are so many historical moments that punctuate each of these chapters. Was that to like underline the tragedy that was happening, or was it to just root us or ground us in the moment in history that it was
I
taking place?
really felt like it was important to have the history, like these little demarcations of time, because it makes us. I didn't want this to be the reader to be able to run away or escape this from like something that's just fantastical.
Mhm.
Like like Reagan's death, or the Gacy stuff, or I mean, there's a number of things in the novel. But
Oklahoma
all of the stuff I
bombing.
wanted to feel like, yeah, we're all complicit. It's all shared history, right? And even though this family is fictional, um, I'm trying to tell the truth about something that I feel, and I think the historical little buoys in there maybe help it feel more real in some way. I hope that was my intent, at least.
Oh, it does. So, like the second time I was reading it, I was like really curious to know how much of these things were fact or even down to the dates and they were accurate. Like
Mhm.
Gacy, he was executed at like 1201 or
Yeah,
1202 or something,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
But like the date of your chapter is the day before that's happening. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting because
yeah.
obviously it's going to go
All
in.
of it was really, really meticulously scoured. Even Henny's wearing in the final chapter, she's wearing an Obama shirt. That I had to really do a lot of research to find out if that particular shirt that she's wearing would have been something because he did visit UCLA at one point where she was teaching, and I wanted that little shirt to reflect that little bit of time, you
Oh,
know. So those details all got like, it was I put them all in there, and then they all got fact checked by my editor's assistant, and most of them, like 94% of them were right, and a few of them were like, that's bullshit. You can't have that.
no,
So
I
I,
love like the research part of that. Even like the churches, because there's this church that was on one of the Pittsburgh
yeah,
cards, and I'm
yeah,
from Pittsburgh.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
like, oh, I know that church, and that's exactly what it looks
Yeah.
like.
I will say that for research like that, it does help. The internet does help. I mean,
Mhm.
back before the internet was, if you had to do a lot of research, you had to go to the library, or you had to like go to. There was so many different kinds of research you had to do, and for this novel, it was really helpful. I mean, I did visit a lot of places too, and I did actually do some of that work. But when I was in a pinch, it was good to check on the internet.
Yeah,
Um,
it makes it so much easier. I just love the research part of everything, so it was fun for me to like see that those things were obviously all accurate. Wait, really fast, you just said pinch, and it made me think of pinchback.
yeah.
You use that name multiple times. Like it's in this book and it's in Blackbird, your film, which is like one of my favorite films.
Yeah.
Love it. Like, what does that name mean to you and why does it recur?
There, there's a boxing book. It's like an art book, and it's about Harlem boxers. And the one of the subjects in the boxing book were these black brothers, and they were called the Pinchback Brothers.
Yeah.
And so I never ever I can never ever. That's one of the greatest names I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah.
So I've used it a number of times, just because I love the sound of it and I love the image of it. Um, the other thing, there's this thing right behind me, this picture of this clown.
Okay, I was going to ask you about that too, because the whole Gacy situation, obviously he,
Yeah.
so I feel like,
That's not from that, but weirdly it echoes that.
mhm.
I realized after I wrote my first novel was published in 1994, and I don't remember where it came from, but there's a reference. This kid who's sent to a military school, he references, I can't remember, he's in a doctor's office or something, and he looks up and he sees a picture of a clown with balloons in its cheeks, and I have now put that in everything I've ever written.
Really?
And
Uh,
then I did a play called American Sligo, which was done here in New York, and I put that in the description of the set, just as a my
yeah,
own for my own pleasure, as an Easter egg.
yeah.
And the set designer found this. It's a needlepoint.
Oh my God.
He was like, "Look what I found," and I could not believe he found that. And then when the play closed, it had its run. He gave me that, so that's why I have it on the wall. But
That's,
it's weird. It makes it. I find a way to kind of put it somewhere.
yeah.
It's just this little thing. It's so stupid. It's so juvenile, but
No,
it's
I
just
love it.
it's my own like thumbprint,
Yeah.
on
Well,
whatever.
speaking of that, there were a couple other things I'm curious if you planted and what the intention, or if I'm maybe wrong. Okay, so Ronan, he works at the Saatchi and Saatchi building.
Saatchi
On
and Saatchi building. That's where Penguin Books is. I actually work there.
Okay, that's what I was gonna say. Didn't you also work in that same building on the fourth floor?
The third,
I
yeah, the
heard
fourth, I
that
think it
in
was the fourth floor. Yeah, yeah,
because he does too, and I was like, because I heard an interview, I think, where you were saying that, and then I
yeah.
was
There's,
reading it.
there's
Look it up.
also one of my. I have an earlier novel called The Year of Endless Sorrows, and it's all set in the book publishing industry. And I worked in book publishing for, I think, 5 years at Penguin Books, and that's where. So I'm borrowing a lot of
Yeah,
uh, that very building and that very floor, and some of
yeah.
his experience from. I was a sales assistant. And I had such an amazing time there. I was such a fish out of water, and I had moved here I'm from Chicago, but I went to college in Iowa, and I moved here, moved in with my brother in the East Village. Very fortunately got a job in book publishing that paid me literally my first salary was $16,800 a year.
Amazing.
And and I was a sales assistant, and I just like did that for like 5 years, and that was the building I worked in. And I moved up a little bit. Like you didn't move up, you couldn't make that much money there, but I was around books and I was happy and I was met all these cool people and cool editors and met authors and I was writing my own novel.
Yeah,
My
didn't
first novel published the next year, a few years
yeah.
later.
I was
Yeah.
gonna say, didn't you publish a book pretty soon after,
Yeah,
right?
and it was actually published at Viking, which was it was a it was a young adult novel published by Viking Children's Books, which was on the third floor. So I was published by I was working as a sales assistant and my publisher was on the third floor. So it was a weird thing. And I was kind of like hiding out and as a published author and no one knew. And I was too embarrassed. I was embarrassed and also like also my first advance was so low that I couldn't stop working. You know, my first advance was $4,500.
But that's still a big deal to get published
Oh, it was like
first.
when I got the news, I literally asked my boss if I could go outside and take a break, and I ran around the Saatchi and Saatchi building 3 times. I had so much adrenaline. I thought like my life had been solved in that moment.
Yeah, of course, of course. That's
Yeah,
great. That's a great story. Well, thank you so much for doing this with me and chatting about the work.
yeah. I hope I'm not boring, but
Not
I'm so
boring at
glad
all.
that the book and you read it twice is really nice. Thank you.
I did. I think I've spent the better part of the last 2 months thinking about this book and watching and reading everything. So I'm so grateful for
Oh,
you to
cool,
take time.
cool.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. I
Thank you
appreciate
so much. Thank you. Thank you. I'll talk